Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Ever heard of Empire? It reigns supreme throughout the 2010s as Fox's hottest franchise music industry focused drama. And behind many of the storylines and favorite script lines from your favorite characters and episodes was writer producer Attica Locke, one of the most vivid storytellers working on the page with words today and the esteemed opinion of the Associated Press. While the Los Angeles Times makes a convincing argument that she's changed the parameters of the form, and Oprah Winfrey's O Magazine has praised her as a master of plot. Winner of the Edgar Award for Best Novel, Anthony Award for Best Novel, and CWA Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award, she first introduced us to Jay Porter in Blackwater Rising. Nominated for the 2010 Edgar Award, NAACP Image Award, as well as the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and being shortlisted for the Orange Prize in the UK. While the New York Times admired the fact that Locke's able to write with a serious, stirring moral urgency, akin to that of George Pelecanos or Dennis Lehane. On display once again in the sequel Pleasantville, where Essence magazine promised that this taut thriller is knitted with enough shock and awe and backroom politics to keep you reading and guessing all week long, while the Wall Street Journal raved that it was both a stellar and outstanding work. The Cutting season earned equal reverie, with Dennis Lehane musing that Locke writes with equal amounts of grace and passion. I'd probably read the phone book if her name were on the spine. While the New York Times, comparing the two authors, added their observation that the impressively astute Attica Locke writes about Southern racial and class nuances in much the same way that Mr. Lehane sees those forces at work in Boston. Each is willing to use the murder mystery as a framework for much more ambitious atmospheric fiction, a leisurely and luxuriantly Southern book that is rich with detail. Attica stunned readers and critics to an equally powerful blow with the launch of her Highway 59 series with Bluebird Bluebird, which The Guardian cheered on as Locke's mesmerizing new novel, noting that it bears all the hallmarks of modern crime fiction, but Bluebird Bluebird is a true original in the way it twists these conventions into a narrative of exhilarating immediacy. Locke has a vivid sense of characterization, using everything from dialect to the fabric of one's clothes to make subtle class distinctions and depict mental states. She's building a compelling body of work. In this age of enduring and renewed racial tensions, we need her voice more than ever. National Public Radio called the sequel Heaven My Home timely and evocative, while BuzzFeed assured excited fans that her new novel is a mystery ripe for this age. What makes Locke's mystery so good is her ability to conjure up a mood with vivid prose. Her depiction of Texas is so evocative, you can practically hear the beer cans cracking open and smell the swamp water. Her other recent successes in storytelling in the TV medium include Netflix's When They See Us and the Hulu adaptation of Little Fires Everywhere, along with executive producing and showrunning Netflix's From Scratch limited series, based on her sister Tembi Locke's 2019 memoir. And we're so excited today she's taking out time from her in-demand schedule to be with us. Attica, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Now, as one that writes across multiple creative mediums, whether it's book, TV, or film, is it safe to assume as a child you were influenced equally by all three?
I was an extraordinarily imaginative kid, and my play was very intricate. So I had imaginary friends. I had intricate play around, I would play school, but it would be very involved. And I had Barbies, and my Barbie stories were really intense. They were kind of like nighttime soaps. So I had so many of them. I was a very fortunate kid. So I probably had 20 something Barbies. So there would be like two different families, and there was like, they were beefing, or there was like somebody who was running a company. I watched Dynasty as a kid. So it's TV, it's my imagination, it's toys, it's and books were always there. And I think books were so ubiquitous that it's almost, I think I don't bring it up a lot because it's almost like saying, oh, I drink a lot of water. Like, it's just, my grandmother was a school teacher. My grandmother taught me to read. So I knew how to read when I was about 4 or maybe 5. And I went to school a little bit early. So I had the books from school, like the things that just got they were too old or whatever. So I read all this stuff. And so it's all of these things, but the thing that is closest to the life that I live now, or that I was going to live as an author, was the unfettered play, where I'm just in a room by myself with my own toys. And with those toys, I was making up elaborate stories that had like, you kept the story going. It's like, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you had to remember every plot point of this one's mad at that one, and no, that happened. I got MTV really there. That was a big part of, that was a big influence. I probably watched a lot of nighttime soaps. I don't remember watching the crime shows as much, which is interesting because I watch more now. There's really great crime television now, but I don't remember watching a ton of it growing up. As I got a little bit older, I think I could really appreciate, but then it got better. Then it was like Homicide. That was like, whoa, that was such great television. Music's a big influence on me as well, although I listen to a lot of old music. And when I say old, I've always not listened to the music of my generation. Like, I do, but I also don't. Certainly I was bopping to Madonna like everybody else, and I would be listening to sure, David Bowie, Modern Love, but also David Bowie Changes. So and I love blues, so I was always listening to older blues and older R&B. I'm coming off of, I was listening just to a show on NPR about how hard it is to raise kids now, and they did a detour talking about latchkey kids and talking about how much more freedom kids had than we let them have now. And I remembering just those long afternoons after school of just like playing fort and just doing what, like, there was so much imaginative play that yes, we had TV, and yes, we had MTV, and we had cable. I had cable, I had all this kind of stuff, but there were also stretches of hours that were not filled by a phone, that were not filled even by good video games. Like, you just thought, you just were inside of your own mind in a way that I don't think kids today have the same experience. So I feel like I have deep muscle memory of being still with myself and being entertained by my own mind.
When you look back through your grandmother's book collection, any authors that leap out as making lasting impressions on you right away?
The Westing Game. It's a kid's book. And I read that and I was just like, whoa. There's just a way that it made me feel that I directly connect up to the kinds of writing that I do. Crime fiction, mysteries, like, what does that mean? And who's that guy? And just that book really had a big impact on me. I also remember reading Peyton Place as a kid because I found one at a like antique store in East Texas. And nobody knew that I bought it for like a quarter, because I don't know that I was really young. I don't know that I needed to be reading Peyton Place, but nobody paid any attention. And so I bought this book at at an antique store and read that and loved it and felt very grown up reading it. Of course, she didn't write anything else. So I never read anything else of hers. I read Toni Morrison relatively early. I think some people come to it in college. I'm sure many other people read it, or I'm not trying to say I was some genius. I was in high school. That's not that early. But that's an author who I read early that had a profound impact on me that lasted. Her work, it blew me away. And it was challenging. There are images, and this doesn't, when you read a lot, which you do as well, and Jane Smiley talks about this. Jane Smiley talks about this in her book, 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, that unlike poetry, with novels, you don't always remember specific lines. You might, but that's less the experience than with a poem. But what you remember is what you felt like when you close the book. But there are scenes in Beloved that I actually remember vividly. I don't remember the language, but the scenes I still carry with me as an imprint. And so yes, Toni Morrison, that was really big. And I would be remiss to not also mention To Kill a Mockingbird. As a grown-up, I have mixed feelings about it. I stand by my interpretation of the book. What's funny is the people who gasped. I never thought that was mutually exclusive. Like, I never thought of Atticus Finch as not of the time that he lived in. What I thought was that he did this particular job well. And what I thought as a young reader is, hey, that sounds like how I talk. Like, because I read the book out loud to myself at my dad's house one summer. And it was like Southern language, being between the covers of the book, just kind of validated a way of speaking. that was just delicious and familiar. And in that way, I felt kind of like orally seen. And my dad is an attorney, so that probably was also part of it. But I always thought of that book as like Atticus was of the time that he lived in. And I always thought that Scout might have been like some of the white kids who got involved in Freedom Summer. I thought of that's the way that I looked at it. But yeah, but I never thought of him as a perfect anti-racist man. He was a very good attorney and he did his job.
Once you were then attending high school at Northwestern's famed School of Communication, any teachers or professors who were especially illuminating or inspiring on the craft of writing as you were discovering and developing your talent?
I've had several incredible teachers, and I'm going to mention two high school teachers because that feels more formative and intimate. My 10th grade English teacher, Joyce Eddings, is the first adult who looked at me and said, oh, you can write. It landed somewhere in my bones to hear that. I had written a poem and I remember feeling something electric in writing it, loving how the language played, and to have someone see that and validate it and say that she was deeply shook by something I did, that had a profound effect on me. I also had a wonderful, wonderful theater teacher who's Paul Crump. We all called him PC. And PC was wry and smart and challenging and ambitious and an outlier in a big Texas public high school with like 4,000 kids. He was very much like, we're not going to do any musicals. We're never going to do Our Town. We're going to do Tartuffe, and we're going to set it in New Orleans during Prohibition. Or we're going to do Medea, and we're going to racially blind cast it. And so what that did for me in terms of where my life straddles prose and drama is that I got to participate in the best drama literature out there. And by participate, I mean like I got to be in these productions as opposed to being just a chorus person in the back, because clearly Antigone and Ismene are Greek, or clearly if we're doing Tartuffe and like in a very diverse school, he leaned into that, and he leaned into it in a way that I don't think I would be the same person I am if I had not gotten to be on stage. I don't acting literally fell out of my body the second I graduated high school. I mean, I just don't think I could ever do it again. But for a period of my life when I was so open and impressionable and vulnerable and curious, I'm so glad we didn't do, God bless Neil Simon, but I'm just glad we didn't do like the classic high school thing. It really expanded my brain, and I'm very, very grateful for it.
Did you have designs back then already on breaking into Hollywood ahead of ambitions to become a novelist as you were attending the Sundance Institute's Feature Filmmakers Lab in 1999, studying both screenwriting and directing? Would you reflect back a bit with viewers on how what you learned there aided your incredibly visual writing style as a novelist?
I thought I was going to be a movie director. That was my goal. And I think I was even saying I'm going to be a cinematographer because I didn't understand what the difference was. But yes, between the drama and that deep interest, and then also, I don't know where it came from. And I also watched a ton of television as a child. But when I saw She's Gotta Have It, another thing nobody should have been letting me see at, I think I was like 14 or 15 or something when I saw it. And that movie it's problematic as they look at it as an adult. There's a rape scene in it. But as a kid, as a high school kid, seeing that kind of Black cinema, I mean, I'm sure I had seen at that point, or maybe I really hadn't. I'm trying to think of the 70s Black films. I don't think I'd actually seen Shaft. I don't know that I had actually seen those things. And anyway, She's Gotta Have It was high art. And it was clearly purporting to be high art. And I was just like, what? I was so like shook. And from that moment on, I was like, no, I'm going to I'm going to work in film. And so, yep, I went to Northwestern. In fact, even before I did that, I did a summer program at Northwestern that was about radio, television, and film. Then I went to Northwestern and studied film. I did a screenwriting. It's not a real concentration. It's a program where you did for 2 years, just kind of like you had these classes set aside to look at playwriting and screenwriting and television writing. And I did that for 2 years. And there was a teacher, I think his name was Michael Beach, who was he wrote a screenplay about that became something about the president being kidnapped. I don't know, whatever. But he's the one who taught me something really cool about movies and learning about writing screenplays, which was to time them. He said, I'm adding to this advice. If it's a movie you know really well, so you don't get so caught up in the plot. But basically, every time something happens that moves the plot forward, look at the time. And then over time, you'll realize that every single film, something shifts at about 10 minutes, something really shifts at about 25 to 30. About halfway through, it twists in a totally new direction. Then about, the last like 85, something happens. And it's not really, it's that, yes, that had a big impact on me as a screenwriter. But interestingly enough, Jane Smiley, in her book, 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, talks similarly like this. And she talked mainly in terms of percentages, not page count, but about 10% of the way through your book, something needs to happen like this. At about 75%, something needs to happen here. So there is this sense of no matter what you're doing with structure, even if you think you're doing some, or you are doing some non-linear structure, as somebody consuming the material, we are programmed to about 10% of the way in feel like I'm sinking in a little bit deeper. Oh, and then something turns at about 30% of the way in. Like, these are just rhythms that if you start to look at it, you'll see it in a lot of work. And he was the first person who said to do that. And to this day, I'll be watching any movie and I'll be on the treadmill and something will happen. I'll stop and go, yep, that's about 25 minutes in. That's appropriate that we're now moving into the second act. There are other craft things that can get in the way. Now that I've actually produced television, like in a big, big way, some shows have been not ruined for me, but I can just kind of I can tell all the lines of dialogue that got added after the fact because they needed to bridge the story or fill in the story point. I can just always tell now. But no, that never got in the way, and not in the way of books either. There are other craft things that'll get in the way of books for me. And usually what really gets in the way of my enjoyment of a book is sometimes it's so good that I get this low-level agitation of like, wait, how did you do that? Like, how did you do that? And just what? And I just, it makes me want to, in a way, it kind of makes me want to, I feel this weird tension between, oh my God, I want to put this down and write. And oh my God, I'm never going to write anything ever again because this is so good.
And that spirit was the character Jay Porter, a strip mall attorney who's making a new start of it in Houston circa 1981 when readers first make his acquaintance. One that first arrived on the page in script or book form in what ultimately became your noveling debut, Blackwater Rising?
Jay Porter came because, so the story of my writing life is that I wanted to be a director. And shortly after graduating from Northwestern, I went to Sundance. And I went to both the Screenwriters Lab and the Filmmakers Lab. One of the most pivotal moments in my life as an artist. I learned a lot of big, big lessons. And so shortly after that, I came out of that with a movie deal. And USA Films, that's how much I'm going to age myself. USA Films was going to make what became Bluebird. It was a script about a cafe in a little East Texas town, and two bodies wash up in a bayou. There was no Darren Matthews at that point. But so I had this script. It was very well received. We were getting ready to, I signed a deal with USA Films. We were trying to put it together. They were trying to raise foreign financing. We were beginning to location scout and figure out where we could do this when they kind of pulled the plug on the whole thing. This was about the year 2000. So my goodness, 23 years ago. And at that time, the kind of narrative about the limitations of Black film, and specifically my film, was even more confusing because it was Black, but it also had a half white cat. Like, I live in integrated existence, and it wasn't like an all Black movie or an all white movie. It was both. So like, but it's a Black woman who's in the lead. So how does that work? And we don't think we can raise foreign financing for this. And I was very young, and it broke my heart, and I didn't know your heart could be broken professionally. It hurt. And I was also very scared because it was my whole soul. clearly because it became a novel 20 years later. It was Texas, it was where I was from, it was crime, it was social commentary, it was so me, and it was being rejected, and it was being rejected at the level of race. And I was hurt, but also scared because I was broke. I was also newly married, if you can believe, still married now. My husband was about to go to law school, and we were broke. And also, I thought Hollywood doesn't really want me because that's me. And I was too young to know that's one rejection. It was a big one. And anyway, I had to make some money. I cannot emphasize the broke part enough. So what I said to myself is, well, you wrote a script. I guess you know how to write scripts. Why don't you just do that? Why don't you just write the scripts that for stuff they're already going to make, stuff they decided they're going to make? Nobody wants what you have, but there's no reason why you can't make a living doing this. And I then became a screenwriter for hire for well over a decade. And I worked all the time, sometimes 2 scripts at once. I worked for every single major studio. Maybe I didn't work for Sony. That's like the only one, but Paramount, Universal, Disney, HBO, and none of that got made either. I just had a break with it. I had an existential crisis. I felt like, what am I doing? All I do is write to go to meetings. And I'm also writing for people who don't fundamentally love to read. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. A script is a literary experience because it is words on paper, and those words are arranged in such a way to make you feel things. But it's to make you feel things to make this other thing. It's not the thing itself. It's an art on the way to another art. And people are sometimes breezing through it quickly and are not marveling over certain sentences or any of that. And they're reading a ton of them, like in a weekend. I just stopped. I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I had a brother-in-law who'd recently gotten diagnosed with cancer. I was about to turn 30. And I just felt like, I don't know. We only have a little bit of time here. And I think some part of my soul is breaking. And so I borrowed money on my house to write a book. I gave myself a year. I had been thinking about books for a while because they're so cheap. Like, I don't need to cast it. I don't need a crew. Nobody needs to green light my brain. I can just write it. I don't know what'll happen. I don't know if it'll get published, but I need no one's permission to actually practice the craft. And so I started writing Blackwater Rising, and that the genesis of that was actually because Jay Porter is a sketch of my father. The genesis of that book was the opening chapter. There was a period of time when I thought, should I be doing this as a screenplay? Because that's what I knew. I went with my gut that I needed to go deeper in some way. And that thing that happened in the boat was something that actually happened in real life. I mean, it wasn't, my dad didn't jump into the water. This was what would have happened if, but we were on a boat and it was my stepmother's birthday. My dad was a small time criminal defense attorney, was in the movement, all that kind of stuff. And he had this party in the book. It's just the two of them, the boat captain. And in real life, there were a lot of us on this boat, and we heard a woman screaming for help. And what struck me about the incident, why it stayed with me so long, because I was about 11 at the time. My dad and my dad's best friend got into a moral debate, and I'd never seen those two fight. I'd never seen a moral quandary play out in front of my eyes. And the two people, my dad and his best friend, they were in the movement together. And they were on trial together in 1970 for inciting a riot. And over the course of their lives, my dad's best friend went on to become a minister. My dad went on to become a criminal defense attorney. So the minister said, we have a moral obligation to stop this boat and do whatever we need to do to help this woman. My father, the criminal defense attorney, said, no, we do not. Because I know exactly what neighborhood we're in. If we stop this boat, whatever gunshot we heard, my child is on this boat. My wife is on this boat. No, I'm not going to invite that kind of chaos around my family. We will simply call the police, and that's the end of it. And there was a story that over the years my dad would tell. He would get a little whiskey in him after Thanksgiving, and we'd tell the story to whoever was around. And there was always this question of what if? Did we do the right thing? Whatever happened, what was that? And so the genesis of Blackwater Rising was that incident and the moral quandary. What I didn't know when I started writing that book was that it was going to become a book that was about this gentleman wrestling with his past and with his time in the civil rights movement, or the period of the movement that's not quite Black Power movement, this weird in-between time. I thought I was going to write like a slick airport kiosk thriller, But as I started writing it, I realized that I was saying something bigger and I was very scared, but I just went with it.
Focusing in specifically on plot, where the Guardian smartly observed that you have an extraordinary gift for reinvigorating tired thriller conventions. How much of the story, including the scene of Jay saving a woman from drowning in the start of the book, biographically based versus say what was fictionalized?
I didn't have a hard time deciding what was Jay and what was my dad, because the truth is, there are facts about Jay's life that line up with my dad's, but his soul is closer to my own. So I didn't have a problem with that. The biggest deal was telling my dad. The biggest deal was we went on our, first of all, I was doing something that my family kind of knew what I was doing, but they didn't really understand it, or, I wasn't really talking about it that much. And I was in Houston. My dad and I went on a barbecue run because we just went and got barbecue for the family. And in the car, they say you have these difficult conversations in the car. So I was like, well, okay, Dad, I'm doing this thing. I'm writing this thing. And there's this character that people are going to think is you. And you might look at it and think, oh, I recognize myself in that, but it is not you. You're going to know it's not really you, but other people may not make that distinction. I'm letting you know in advance, but I'm not asking your permission. I'm just letting you know. He said, okay. And during the writing process, I called him lots of times to ask questions. And usually I was looking for facts from him. Again, the soul of the character is my own, but I was looking for facts. Like, what was the name of this organization you started? And what was the da-da-da? And then I would start memories for him. And he would call me up and say, well, I've got another one for you. And I'd say, Dad, nope, no, thank you. And I would stop him because I didn't want him to give me stuff that I didn't want to hear. I just wanted to be in my own imagination. And so I stopped him. He was very nice and patient about it. And what was even more interesting is that my father ran for mayor. That's where Pleasantville came from. My dad ran for mayor, and he was running for mayor when Blackwater Rising came out. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible campaign. One of the most painful events of my life was him running for mayor, because I didn't know how much of the information we're presented is not true. And it made me think that I had actually never voted accurately in my life. And what I mean by that is not accurate. I don't mean it that way. I mean, if part of voting is making your choice based on research and all this kind of information in front of you about the issues, the candidates' takes on the issues, the candidates' history, and I experienced the inside of a campaign and knew how much of it was lies, that meant every time I was in the booth, did I actually exercise, was that democracy? Uh-oh. And so that was all very painful. But anyway, a reporter cornered my dad about Blackwater Rising, knowing that the book was a sketch of him, and was like, well, Mr. Locke, I mean, you're trying to run the city of Houston and you didn't jump out into the water to save that woman. And do you have the kind of courage to da da da? And my dad said, hey, dude, don't do that. Don't do that to my kid. That's her story. That's her lens on it, and whatever, don't make her feel bad for something wonderful that she did.
Well, he, along with the rest of your family, must have been extremely proud with its reception upon hitting bookshelves, including book page raving that as a debut it is nothing short of astonishing. Well, nominations then came for an Edgar Award, an NAACP Image Award, a Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and being shortlisted for the Orange Prize over in Britain. Wow.
Once I got an agent, it wasn't a big journey to sell it. It took me a long time to figure out what the fuck I was doing, excuse my language. When I started writing it, even though I was walking away from Hollywood, I sure like that Hollywood business model. I'll write some pages and you guys pay me first. Let's do that. And so I tried to use my Hollywood agency, which at the time did not even have a book department. I tried to use them to help me get a book agent. And I had like 100 pages that, believe it or not, alternated chapters between Jay Porter and Charlie Luckman. And nobody wanted that. But one person was nice enough to say, I'm not going to represent this book, but can you pass along a piece of a thought to her? Tell her this is not her book. Tell her that her book is Jay Porter. And the second I heard those words, I knew it was true. And I was fucking terrified, because I knew it was going to ask me to do the very thing I said before, which is Jay Porter's soul is my soul. And I was going to bare myself to the world, and I was very scared. But then I started over, and I wrote, my first draft was 665 pages. And I tried to send that out to get an agent. People were like, no, thank you. On my own, I cut 200 pages on my own. And in the time it took me to do that, my agency got a book department. And so then I got a book agent, and then we worked on it together and argued some and figured out another draft. And then when it went out, it went out with ease. That the hardest part was just the journey to get something that was good enough and in a size that people wanted to buy. But then it happened relatively quickly. I remember standing in line at TJ Maxx buying a tie for my husband for, I think, Father's Day, when he said, okay, my agent said, okay, it's done. It's out there. And then when it sold, I was so overwhelmed. I went to the movies by myself and sat in the dark because I couldn't understand what was happening. How did this happen? And I went to go see Sex and the City by myself in the middle of the day and just sat in the dark. And then when I held the book, I mean, it was just, I may become quite emotional because it really was not one of maybe the greatest gift I ever gave myself was to listen to the part of me that felt like she was dying creatively, and to leap off a cliff and see if I could fly. It was hard. I was terrified, but it was also exhilarating. It was transformative. It was just wonderful.
Now, the Los Angeles Times, upon first reading Cutting Season, would argue that with this novel, Locke has opened up not just her writing, but also the parameters of the form. We cite this observation only to ask how conscious you are of those mysteries you read before you began writing that you're trying to now honor the traditions of, while still freeing up your imagination to go wherever Karen Gray, Donovan Isaacs, or the muse was leading you as you created on the page.
That was a very, very, very hard book it wasn't that it was hard to write. I had a wicked case of second book syndrome, a wicked case of, I can't do this again. There's no way, and nobody's going to want this. And then frankly, and I'm saying this very lovingly, my editor was like, what is this? Part of it is because I think she thought, even though I put in my contract, I said, the second book, maybe Jay Porter, but you can't make me do it contractually. I want to be kind of free. I think this was not what she thought I should follow up with. And so, and also I think even though the book never changed drastically, I made enough changes to get her to kind of come around to an appreciation of it. But I think it was mainly a total and complete shock. Like, what? Why are we in Louisiana? We're supposed to be back in Houston and oil and all that. Why are we over here? So, and I was going to give up because she just for a long time, and I say this so lovingly because you got through it, but for a long time I was just like, and I remember I'm actually looking at the window of my house to see where I parked my car to have a conversation privately with my agent because I was going to give up. And he said, I don't think you should. I hear you. And if that's what you decide, but I don't think that you should. And I'm glad I didn't.
The Economist would observe that Locke's prose revels in the sumptuous Louisiana landscape, and wow, is Belle V Plantation a character itself in this story. Was this based on a real plantation, and how much time did you physically spend on any yourself in the course of researching, or even while writing this novel? Did the property itself in turn help give you direction on the different twists and turns in the story that followed?
I went to a wedding on one of these plantations in 2004, the year before Katrina. I knew that the wedding was on a plantation because I'd seen the invitation, but I grew up in the South. I grew up in Texas. There are restaurants with the name plantation in them. There are whole subdivisions that's something plantation. I just thought, oh, there's going to be some ceiling fans and a porch. I mean, I don't know. I didn't think it was a literal plantation. And I'd never been on one before. And the bride and groom bussed everybody from New Orleans. So leaving New Orleans, you're driving through the Louisiana countryside. And you are then driving through, frankly, abject Black poverty. And then all of a sudden along the Mississippi comes one of the most beautiful things I'd ever laid eyes on in my life. And I felt like I was going to throw up. Because what are you talking about? It's one of the most beautiful things you ever said in your life. All of that poverty you just drove through, this is why. And yet it was so visceral that I couldn't deny it. I described it as the only thing I could think is a Jewish person listening to Wagner. What is happening to me in my physical body when I know that this is so fraught? And then when we got there, it just got weird. We actually got off the bus, it just got weirder. We got off the bus and I said a prayer. The second my feet hit the ground, I could not walk from the parking lot without acknowledging the souls that had been there. I needed to do that for myself. I then, as you walk to get to where the wedding was, you had to pass this. The plantation is called Oak Alley, and anybody should look it up. It's fucking stunning and also gross. And gross because they like, unlike other plantations that have embraced more truth in how they present the history, at that time they had torn down all their slave cabins. My memory is there was a restaurant, there was a gift shop where you could get some ice cream. It was a B&B. It was just slavery Disneyland without ever mentioning slavery. And so you had to walk by this plaque to get to the champagne toast. There's a big plaque with the names of every slave and what they cost. And I was like, where the fuck am I? Why, what is happening? And in fact, what was also interesting is that, so my husband is white, and it was an interracial couple getting married. It was a Black woman and a white guy. So then I'm like, okay, that's what tonight is. Forget the fact that there were these women dressed up as like mammies who were opening the door. They were white, but for whatever, the kerchiefs, so weird. Who opened the door to let us in? A guest showed up dressed as a Confederate soldier. I thought he worked there. I was like, how long have you worked here? He's like, I work here. He's like, I just thought went on a plantation. I come dressed as a Confederate soldier. I was like, what is happening? But I'm thinking, and the bride's dad was a minister, and the bride was Black. I was like, okay, I get it now. We are going to come here tonight and make some kind of statement about where we are. That there's this Black and white couple marrying. It was actually the night of my anniversary. They got married on my anniversary. So I was like, okay, we're gonna talk about love, remaking this fraught land and the history. Nobody said a word about it all night long. It was literally just a pretty background, and it broke my brain. It just broke my brain, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And that's when I thought, well, I guess I'm going to write something about this. That's where it came from. And I went back and stayed at the B&B. And the only hiccup that happened is I went to stay at the B&B in about 2000. It was 2009. And I did some research. And then I went right from there to go help with my dad's campaign. And then that all happened. And I was like, I'm writing the wrong book. I shouldn't be writing this stupid cutting season thing. And then my editor didn't like it. There were just so many reasons why I was going to give up. And I'm really glad I didn't.
Speaking of which, you next picked back up with Jay Porter in Pleasantville. First, what made you decide that 15 years was the right span of time to begin this next chapter in the story with?
I did it less because of Jay. Although, sometimes your unconscious is doing lots of things that you're not aware of. What really struck me that I wanted to write about was that 1996, when the book takes place, was the first year of elections when the city went down to one newspaper. And because I happen to know from having been a part of my dad's campaign, how much the fact that there was only one newspaper in the city was a problem, and how much that's happening everywhere. You and I grew up in a time where cities might have 3 newspapers, and then all down to one. I'm back to my feeling that I had every time I've ever walked into a booth. Was I really exercising democracy if I didn't have all the information? And isn't multiple newspapers in a city, don't you need that kind of tension in order to get at truth? So I really wanted to pick that year because of that. What it also gave me, though, was a way to feel as if I weren't doing a series. I was afraid to feel like I was doing a series. At that time, I didn't even want to call the book a sequel. I was scared of it. It helped that I read Scott Turow's Innocent, where that character also aged from presumed innocent. It also helped that I had this intent. It came to me like a lightning bolt that Bernie, his wife, was gone. And I say lightning bolt, but I had lost, the book is dedicated to my brother-in-law who got cancer when I decided I was going to write books. And then he was gone by the time I really started. I started researching that book. Days I would sit in his hospital room. My sister always had somebody on duty, and he had died. And I thought, you can't kill Bernie off, Attica. That's just kind of cruel and crazy. And then I went, oh, you mean like my brother-in-law dying? That's life. And I think that's what I also need as a writer. I don't think I can write anything that doesn't walk through grief. I have to walk through grief. I needed a story that did that. And so 1996, there was only one newspaper, and we're trying to have a major elections. Jay then is a father, which was interesting to see, and had a big life with Bernie and then lost her. So that's where all of that came from.
Why do you have to walk through grief?
I'm saying as an artist, whatever I consciously told myself I was going to write about, grief would have found its way in, because I was so deeply grieving that it just would have found its way in. And This found its way in a more literal sense because somebody was also grieving in the book. But whatever I would have written, somehow what I was trying to understand about life and the reality of loss would have found a way in the work.
Let's take viewers next on a ride down Highway number 59. To begin, please elaborate on how deep a dive you took back in time in your own childhood memories and in the history of Cato Lake itself and researching Bluebird, where you said that geography shaped this whole story and you called it a love letter to Black Texans. Please elaborate on the vision that you had for this novel at the outset of its writing in terms of where you wanted it to go in scope.
Well, it defined the story in that it defined my life. My entire family on both sides are from tiny towns along Highway 59. I spent my childhood driving up and down, riding in the back seat of the car up and down Highway 59. That is another place in which I became a writer, in the back seat of that car. I've never been able to read in the car because I get car sick. I never had a Game Boy. There certainly were no cell phones. What there was trees outside the window. What there was, oh, we just drove by that barbecue stand, or we just drove by that ice house, or we just drove by that ranch. I always call it like a rural fantasia. I was just absorbing the East Texas landscape, and it just lit up my mind and my imagination. Like, where does that creek go? Because you would be passing by, you would see a creek snake off into the trees. What's that? And East Texas in the wintertime, the pine trees and stuff get real spindly and kind of skeletal, and it just has a kind of gray creepiness to it. And so that's also part of my journey of becoming a writer, and it's a part of my lens on the world that, you know, everybody, my whole everything comes from Highway 59, which is why, you know, when I went to Sundance, the first thing I ever wrote that just was deeply in my voice was this script about that was off Highway 59. And I turned it into a book. And the other way in which geography informs it is just fact of not just geography, but the power of land itself, because the fact that on both sides of my family, people had land is why we never left during the Great Migration, because we had something. And on both sides of my family, from dirt came PhDs and doctors and lawyers and politicians and educators and writers. Yeah, just literally out of farming cotton and corn. I have many, many doctors in my family. I have many, many educators. I have, you know, it's just kind of like amazing to me. So yeah, all that red dirt, I say, is in my veins.
Specifically stepping into the boots of African-American Texas Ranger Darren Matthews, what in your style makes for a strong protagonist that can carry a story on his shoulders, so to speak, as Ranger Matthews does here?
You have to, in my opinion, in building characters, pile on complications, and it'll feel really scary, but just you have to do it. Meaning, drinking problem. Marriage is funky. Marriage is funky because his uncle's kind of in the marriage a little bit. What's up with his uncles? He lost his dad. Like, you just have to keep layering on complications that feel like, how is all of that going to be addressed? But you have to also say to yourself, it doesn't actually even matter if everything, it actually will get in there some kind of way, but you for yourself have to, because people are layered, and they're layered because of their experiences, their highs and their lows, their wins, their losses, their trauma, their loves. And you just have to keep complicating it. And also, for me, I like to look at where people sit, where, like, people are their contradictions to me. Jay Porter's fundamental contradiction is, I don't fucking want to get involved. God damn it, I have to get involved. Darren's contradiction is his feeling about law, that I both, and it sits in the between the pole of the uncles who raised him. Like, is this question of, is the law and me wearing the badge a good thing for Black folks, or is it a terrible thing for Black folks? And is the law a thing that is righteous, or is the law inherently necessarily dirty? Those kinds of contradictions can give your character, they make them interesting, and they can give it forward motion because it begins to inform the plot. So I would look at where people, one of Attica's fundamental contradictions in life is, I'm both want to be seen and I really don't want to be. Please don't look at me. Please leave me alone. And I just think we are our contradictions, and that's what makes us interesting.
Even against these tragic backdrops, Oprah Winfrey's O Magazine really pointed to the deepest pleasures to be found here are in her renderings of those who've loved and lost but still want to believe in a world's benevolence. Who among this beautiful cast that readers meet did you find yourself looking most forward to inhabiting, or perhaps growing most attached to by the time the story was nearing its conclusion?
Geneva, not even a question. And I even like old Wally. I mean, I when you he bottom line, the dude is in love with her, and that's why he's fucking crazy. I can have compassion, and I think with art and with storytelling, you have to have compassion for your quote unquote villains, I think, because they're real people too. I remember having to have compassion for the plantation Velvet, or I had to love it because otherwise it would, like, I had to write it in such a way that I actually loved it. And I had to confront the parts of me. It's the way I feel about Bellevue is the way I feel about Texas. I refuse to hate what made me, just refuse. And slavery made me. So I refuse to, it is a fact that happened and I have to work through my feelings about it. But it's a fact that happened. And I refuse to hate Texas because it made me. That doesn't mean I don't challenge it. That doesn't mean I don't call it out. Same with the fucking institution of slavery, but it is literally our country. There's no way to not own that is what you can redress past wrongs while also acknowledging the worst thing is to be unconscious about all of it or to gaslight and pretend like it wasn't real and awful and painful.
It must have then been quite a whirlwind to take home the 2018 Edgar and Anthony Awards for Best Novel and the Steel Dagger Award all in the same year.
I think I'm somebody who can't take it in, but yes, I forgot all that. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. 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 And my little East Texas book got people's attention. But the experience of winning the Edgar in the room was overwhelming to me and really moving because I had been to the Edgars before and thought, I don't see myself here. I don't really see myself here. That organization and that group recognized my story. It was pretty emotional in the moment. And I remember I said something about it from the podium when I accepted the award that, wow, that I write stuff that's pretty black and pretty political and I had not always seen that represented in the mystery writers of America. Yeah, but I'm very honored.
You said in a recent interview that you knew when you began writing the Highway 59 trilogy that you had the aforementioned Caddo Lake in mind, calling it one of the most evocative and striking places in the world. Please talk about how that helped shape the landscape that readers travel in this novel.
Caddo Lake is near Marshall. It's near Marshall, Texas, which is where my dad grew up. I had only been there once in my life. And when I knew I was going to do this book series about Highway 59, it was immediately on my list. I knew I had to write about Caddo Lake. I went there, I believe, in the late 90s. We went up to Marshall for Christmas and we went out to Caddo Lake because they have a Christmas boat parade where they decorate their boats with lights and there's a parade. And I was like, what is happening? And when I got out there, the moss and those fucking cypress trees that they look like fingers, and you got these boats riding through there, and these people that live out there, and it was just so cool and creepy that and just like a weird culture that you have a boat parade. What? I just was fascinated by it. And the fact that it's so big that it spans 2 states. When I knew I was going to do a book series about that went up and down Highway 59, I knew I would write about Caddo Lake, but I'd only seen it once and I had to go back out there in order to write the book. And I made my dad come with me because I was too chicken to go by myself.
As a character creator, is it easier when you're bringing others back from the first book that you already know and understand to a certain degree? Lisa, for instance. Or do you enjoy the challenge of adding new dynamic personalities like Graber, Hassini Caddo, Indian family matriarch Margaret Goodfellow, and her daughters? And as a screenwriter by training, you don't have to get a costume designer or anyone. You can really do it all in your mind. Is that one of your favorite parts of the novel writing process?
I was nervous because I was a little bit like, who am I to write about Native Americans? I think what gave me grace and what gave me permission is that I had invented a hybrid group of people that had lived together on a tiny island, and generations out, they could be what I wanted them to be in a way.
When you're solving a crime like this one, how early on do you know who committed it? And what do you enjoy about playing cat and mouse with the reader while you're weaving that mystery?
The first 3 books, which is why they are so long, I didn't know who did it when I started. I just kind of went. And to me, the most fun is just start a book, because you don't have to make it all wrap up yet. You just enjoy the prose, enjoy the world, enjoy, setting up a problem. And then so my process is, I love that for about 80 pages or so. And then I'm like, oh shit, okay, now let's get in there and figure out what happens next and how's this all going to tie up. And with the Darren Matthews books, first with Bluebird, it had been a script. Again, there was no Darren in it, so it was definitely reinvented, but it had a kind of natural kind of spine to it. With Heaven My Home, I had to write it in fits and starts. And so at one point I tried to plot out to the end, and then I had to go away and do some TV stuff or whatever. And when I came back, I was like, nope, that's too much story. And I wanted those books to be slimmer. I was like, that's too much story for the percentage of where we are in the book. It's too much story. So I need to rethink that. So I do a lot of circular writing, write 80 pages, figure out what happens next. Maybe you have to go back and repolish those to make what's coming fit. But I like the puzzle of it. I like the surprise, even for myself, which is probably why I didn't know who did it in the first 3 books, because I wanted to kind of figure things out as I go along. But I like the puzzle of it. And I like going back and planting things that are really subtle. I like that a lot too.
Now, the Wall Street Journal noted that by the end of this novel, you'd tied up enough loose strands to satisfy our readers, while leaving enough loose ends to make us eager for Ranger Matthews' next adventure in the Lone Star State. To that end, please share anything that you can about the 3rd and final book in the Highway 59 trilogy.
I think about Jay every now and then when I'm driving along, and wonder if I'll return to him. I don't know that I will.
Turning to your amazing screenwriting successes, we would get hate mail if we did not ask about Empire and your time writing on episodes like Fires of Heaven, The Tameness of a Wolf, Cupid Kills, The Unkindest Cut, Strange Bedfellows, and Absent Child. Please talk briefly about the difference between writing in Lucius and Cookie's respective character headspaces. And did you have any favorites among the children's characters to write on the page?
It's either Lucius or Cookie. I mean, they were the kind of heartbeat of the show. They were the ones most likely on set to say something totally different than what was on the page. That show really found itself always on set, because they were definitely going to speak up, ad lib, or do this. I mean, some of the best lines of the series were ad libbed. I mean, they were very fun in that way. What we're trying to do was always hold to the spine of the scene so that you could get some of the great things that are coming from inside the actor and never veer too far off of story. I got in it because I have the title New York Times bestseller, because it was a bestseller. It was on the list for a week. You get to keep that title, but I've never been like this runaway bestseller. So I was having to get in private school, and I was like, well, this is not cute anymore. I need to pad this income in a way. And all those movies that never got made, the feature that I wrote, the things I wrote for other people to hire, all of that kind of stuff that I was doing, it was deep character work. It was grown-up storytelling, things that were richly complicated and, had sociopolitical overtones. All of that work moved to television. I was right on the edge when I walked away. I didn't quite get that The Sopranos wasn't an outlier, that was the start of something really different in television. I didn't have enough foresight to see it. So all the time I'm writing books and loving it and being well received and being an author and thinking, that's it, I'm never going back to Hollywood. My sister said, I don't think you're done with Hollywood. And I knew emotionally I must not be, because when my Writers Guild membership lapsed for a while, I was like, oh, no, that's my whole identity. But anyway, I needed money, and I went back to my agent and went, hey, remember me? I'm back. And I went there because I wanted to talk about a show idea I had. But while we were there, we started talking about what new shows were staffing. And I said, well, send me lots of scripts, I'll see. And they were kind of shocked that I was willing to staff, but I was. And Empire was one of the scripts that I read that really stood out because it felt fresh. I had never quite seen anything like it. When I met with Lee Daniels, Danny Strong, and Eileen Chaikin, who was the kind of triumvirate of power at the top, what I liked about them is that, unlike other people I'd met with, they did not discount that I had taken like 3 to 4 years away from Hollywood. They thought it was interesting. And because Lee Daniels and Danny Strong at that time had never done television before, they didn't have any rules about what a room should look like. So there were other people in there who'd never done television before. And I maintained that the first season of Empire was as good as it was because we had no rules about what it was supposed to be. So it came across very kind of vanguard. We wrote the whole first season in a vacuum. The show was pretty much wrapped by the writer's room was pretty much wrapped by the time it aired. So it was just like, what just happened? Nobody could have predicted it, but I do know that while we were making up the stories in the writer's room, we were all like, or at least I was like, I would watch the hell out of this show. This looks like fun. And we were right. It was a ton of fun and people loved it. And it took a turn and it kind of, in my opinion, slipped away from all of us. It was a victim of its own success in a lot of ways. I began thinking about what comes after this in season 2. And I wrote the book proposal for the 59 series in season 2. Really fun being on set. You can sometimes on set have to rewrite a scene or reorder it. And sometimes it's coming because the director has a question or the actors feel a different way about the scene. And I remember the first time Taraji walked up to me and said, I think I should say something different here. This is feeling a little bit flat. And I was such a deer in headlights, but I had to hide it and act like I knew what I was doing. But inside I thought my heart was beating so fast. And but I had to do it. We just had to perform. And I just went in a corner and just rewrote it and gave it back to her. Like, you have to do that all the time. And now that stuff doesn't scare me. But when it first happened, I was terrified.
Well, you certainly got over that fear by the time you were working on your next show, this time with Netflix on When They See Us, based on the infamous 1989 Central Park jogger case, and notably nominated for an outstanding limited series at the Emmys. Was this just too irresistible a story to not say yes to help telling the truth of on the screen here?
This all came from Ava. The story is that Raymond Santana, one of now they call themselves the Exonerated Five, I think he reached out to her on Twitter about tell our story. And so by the time I got brought on, it was already set up, I believe, at Netflix. She had all of, their life rights or whatever she needed to tell their story. We had already arranged to have pretty extensive interviews with each of the men. I mean, our interviews were like 7 hours long with each one. They were all day. Me, Robin Swikert, there's another writer, oh God, his name is escaping me. Ava popped in and out for the interviews. She would stay, because she was in the middle of doing post on a big movie. But yes, we spent almost 2 weeks designing our questions so that we knew we had them for this period of time. We were asking them to revisit one of the worst incidents of their entire lives, so painful. We just wanted to make sure that the questions had a nice flow, that we were respectful, and we individually interviewed them, each one for like 7 hours. Like, we ordered in lunch, and it was all day.
That must have aided you tremendously in recreating their personalities and points of view in the scripts.
That, and just to tell that whole story that had been told so many different ways from everybody's point of view but theirs. It allowed us to really, it's in the title, the way that you're positioning the lens is really through their eyes of what it looked like for them as children. That part was what landed most for me. I'm their age. Some of them were the exact same age. And when I think of where I was, April of 1989 versus where they were kids. They were just kids.
Little Fires Everywhere sounds like it was an amazing project to be involved with, especially with Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington at the helm. Was it a super different experience adapting another author's novel with Celeste Ings? And when you're a writer with such capable cast members, which is different from a book because you can see what they can do, how trippy is it to then watch those actors of such amazing range inhabit these characters that you wrote lines for?
I just thought that book was so rich. There were so many things to play with. There's motherhood, there's envy, there's class. It's not explicit in the book, race, but obviously by hiring Carrie and her being a producer on it, that became a part of the story. There's the legal issues around adoption. There's teenageness of the 90s. There were just like so many different layers of things that were really interesting. And that writer's room was a wonderful writer's room. But it was fun to have so much juicy material to work about and to think about. And I'm a mom, and I'm a mom who's been jealous of other moms. So that dynamic between the two women was just fascinating to me.
Now, we're sure there was no pressure at work with your next adaptation of your own sister Tembi Locke's memoir from scratch for Netflix. What was it like to step up from a producer and scriptwriter into the fuller roles of executive producer and showrunner here?
Luckily, by the time we got to set in the writer's room, and she was in the writer's room, in the writer's room was the place where I just felt like, I got this. I got it. I got this. When we got on set and you're starting to then fold in limits, it's not on paper anymore. This costs this. We only have this many hours in a day. What are you going to cut? Like that, it all became this bigger dance with so many different brains. What's beautiful about it is it can be quite symphonic, that all of us like come together, and the production designer, costumes, set deck, the cinematography, you make something beautiful when we all come and kind of have a hive mind, or when somebody thinks something that nobody else thought of. And my sister that's where our partnership became really great, because she was on set every day. She was an EP, and she's an actor by trade. So like she was able to see things and giving notes on set that I didn't see. She also knew the story better than anybody. And we and I have a leadership style that the door was kind of always open. So we got great ideas from props department. We got great ideas from anybody. Like, there's a good idea, we'll take it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And I've written 5 books. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And mainly because it's 5 cities, 2 countries, 3 languages. It was the hottest summer on record in Europe and in Sicily. It was a lot. It's really the most exhilarating, transformative thing I've ever done. I'm so proud of it. So proud of it. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
What's coming up in that arena that you might be excited and able to tell us a bit about here?
I can't actually talk about anything right this second, but there are some exciting things coming in a possible exciting adaptation.
Finally, how much fun do you have interacting with your readers these days? Whether they're telling you about how your book helped them better understand issues going on in society, or even from history. Or especially those who tell you that you inspired them to pick up the pen and want to give either the craft of films or novels a try.
Funny, I've never thought of it that way, but I will say I have had the experience of people telling me that my book shifted their perspective on something. I probably don't stop enough to take it in, but that's kind of the point. And so how lucky am I that a book landed in the right person's hands, that it shifted their perspective about America, or about what it is to be Black in America, or this history is everybody's history. I will say I have a child who is Gen Z. They make me the most hopeful right now about our country. They make me the most hopeful. They are curious. They are open, like you said. They're kind, actually. Not all of them. What they're living in, their commitment to equanimity, to a way for everybody to be seen and respected as who they are, is really powerful. Really powerful.
Attica, it has been an absolute pleasure and privilege talking today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you, Jake. All right, take care.